Well, Science Club for Girls is honored to be speaking with Beth Chandler, CEO of YW Boston, and Rana el Kaliouby, CEO of Affectiva. We have so much respect and gratitude for the work both of you do in creating more diverse, equitable, and inclusive communities, whether it be through understanding the cultures we create in our own organizations and how they fit into larger systems via the work of YW Boston, or within the STEM ecosystem to develop emotional artificial intelligence to use technology to better connect with one another in more meaningful ways and combat intolerance through the work at Affectiva.
It's great to be here. I guess my background a little bit to share, I have been in the nonprofit sector for over 20 years, but I have spent some time in the for-profit sector as well. And what really motivated me to join YW Boston was its mission, which is to eliminate racism and empower women. And that drove me because I've worked for so many organizations where they exist in part because of the systemic issues around racism and sexism. And so I wanted to work with an organization who's really going after the root causes of those issues. And so at YW Boston, our focus is on helping organizations create more inclusive environments so that women, people of color, and especially women of color can thrive at all levels.
So excited to be here. Thank you for having me, Bonnie. So I grew up, I'm originally from Egypt. I grew up around the Middle East and studied computer science as an undergraduate. And then from then on did my PhD building the first ever emotionally intelligent machine, because I realized that technology was emotion blind, but emotions and empathy is what makes us most human. And I wanted to bring that into the way we connect and communicate with one another. That took me on a journey which brought me over to the United States, to MIT as a postdoc. My career goal was to become faculty, but I quickly realized I had a unique opportunity to commercialize this technology, this baby that I had, that I felt so passionate about, and spun out Affectiva, 11 years ago on this mission to humanize technology before it dehumanizes us. I am very passionate about bringing more women and girls into technology and science, and creating more diverse and inclusive spaces so that these diverse voices have an opportunity to shape what technology looks like, which is really key because, of course, technology is now, deeply ingrained in every aspect of our lives. And if it's designed by a small subset of people, it's not going to work for all of us. So it's something that I've become very, very focused on to bring more girls and women into our, tech spaces.
There are a lot of reasons why we should care. Part of it's the moral reason, in that everybody should have opportunities to be successful. And it doesn't matter, how you identify, that shouldn't impact your ability to be successful. And so that's part of the reason why we should care. And if the moral argument doesn't work for you, there's also the business argument, which is we are going to be a more diverse country year after year after year. By 2050, we anticipate there being no racial majority in the United States. And so that means we need to make sure that everybody's a part of the fabric of this country so that the country can do well, so we can perform well. When you look at data, such as McKinsey's data that looks at companies that have more racial and gender diversity in leadership, those organizations outperform their peers. They don't perform equally, they don't underperform, they actually outperform their peers. And so if organizations have more diversity across a variety of dimensions, they're going to do better. And if an organization does better, then everybody in that organization benefits. And so, both from the moral reason and the business reason, it makes sense. And if you look at what employees want in organizations, there's a higher percentage of employees that care about being in diverse environments. And so you're going to lose your competitive edge. You're going to lose your ability to hire employees if you don't have greater diversity. So for a variety of reasons, it matters to have more organizations that are really inclusive.
Yeah, so it's so important to really think about diversity and inclusivity in STEM fields in particular, because again, technology is so ingrained in every aspect of our lives, and we each have our blind spots when we're designing and deploying these technologies. And so if you think about it, if you have a very kind of non-diverse set of people designing these technologies, by default, these technologies are not going to work for all of us. And so we need to just bring diverse voices around the table. And that could be gender diversity. It could be age diversity. That's super important. At Affectiva, we have a program for high school students to bring them into the equation and kind of hear their voices and perspectives and how we are thinking about the technologies of the future. But of course, ethnicity and even diversity of backgrounds. We definitely need more women on boards. We need more female founders. We need more female funders. But we also need more women and young people and young girls to design and deploy these technologies. For example, in our field, if AI is designed, without diversity in mind, it ends up being biased, and then it's deployed at scale. And so we find ourselves just continuously perpetuating the bias that exists in society in these scalable technologies. And that's a real big problem. And so, again, it is so key that we bring these diverse voices to the table.
Navigating the system versus transforming the system. What are your individual approaches?
It's actually one of the reasons why we do the work that we do at YW Boston is because there are many organizations that have an approach of we have to teach the women, we have to teach the people of color how to better navigate the system, right? How do we give them the necessary skills and tools to be successful? And our position is that many of the women of color, they have the tools, they have the skills. It's that the environments don't allow them to be who they are and to be successful in those environments. And so it's really thinking about what can organizations do differently so that everybody can be successful, as opposed to thinking about, depending on how you identify, how can you navigate a system? So an example of that would be thinking about when an organization has promotion criteria. Is that applicable really across the board to everybody? Are there opportunities for people to get support if they need it? And for those that don't need it, then they don't need to get the support. That's what equity is about, giving people what they need to be successful. And so are you as an organization looking at your data and saying, are people moving up at the same rate regardless of how they identify, and also looking at not just race and gender, but the intersection of both of those.
It is so important to be intentional around how we bring diversity to our tech spaces. I'm going to focus on the tech sector in particular. There are a number of ways to do that. So if you're in a leadership position and, for example, you are hiring for talent, it is so key to ensure that the pipeline is diverse. And if you're working with recruiters and they're not bringing you diverse talent, demand that the talent is diverse and send them back, to do a better job. I would also say even the way job descriptions are articulated, sometimes that could be off-putting and not really inclusive. So we've become really thoughtful and, again, intentional around how we describe these jobs and ensure and be proactive to reach communities that may not necessarily consider applying, to our industry or to our specific company. If you are managing, women or persons of color or both, kind of nudge. Sometimes you need to nudge people on your team to, for example, negotiate better, to self-advocate, to speak up. We find that all the time at Affectiva. And we've gotten into a habit where if one of the women on my team gets interrupted, I will literally stop the meeting and I will say, hang on, everybody, just a second. Gabby, what were you saying? I really want to hear what you were saying. So it's little things like that that hopefully kind of move the ball forward.
Wow. I'll add something. I just want to build on something that Rana shared. And it was about what you can do as a manager or someone that has privilege, because we all have privilege in different ways. And so instead of relying on employees to always put their hands up, because again, depending on how somebody identifies, what their experience is, they may not be comfortable being as proactive about their progression within an organization. So it's really incumbent upon leaders in organizations and people with privilege. And again, that can be lots of people in an organization, to think about how are you creating environments to help support people. And so instead of just waiting for people to raise their hand, be proactive and saying, here's an opportunity that I think is going to be a growth opportunity for you. I think you should do this. Or as Rana said, I heard somebody saying something over here. Can we just stop and wait a minute and let them finish what they were saying? Because it's a great idea. Let's build upon that. And so what are the things that all of us can do to really help our peers, and if we're managers, help those that we're managing to succeed in our organizations?
I think it's really important to showcase role models and people who look like you. And so the work you're doing, for example, highlighting, women in the community and bringing these women in to share their experiences with these girls and their career paths, right? Their trajectories and their struggles and their successes. I think that is so important, because when you can see somebody who looks like you, who's ahead a few steps, that makes it a lot more real. So that's one thing. I would also say just kind of the opportunity to be part of a like-minded community, right? And again, this is where what Science Club for Girls does is so powerful, because you're bringing these girls together, they're solving these problems, they're kind of finding the power within, which I think is really cool. And thankfully, there's a lot more of these spaces now that exist. So I would encourage, if you're, a mother, or you have a daughter or a sister, to expose girls to these opportunities, because I think they're amazing.
And I would add on to that. I think Rana is right that there is something powerful about being in a community of people that have similar interests, that may have similar identities, so that you can talk, you can get support. And that is extraordinarily, I think, important for people who identify as girls and women to have, to feel like we're supported, particularly in sectors where we don't see a lot of us. I think that's difficult. I think being able to have mentors, people that are older that you can go to, that you can hear their stories, and be able to learn from their experiences. I think, again, that is also something that is so powerful that Science Club for Girls is able to offer. And so I think it's important, again, to encourage people to find, communities where they feel they can be supported, because that support's going to be able to help them when they are, in organizations and want to be able to thrive, and sometimes don't know where to go or who to ask. Mentorship is certainly important, but I think what, we're talking a lot about now is sponsorship. And that differs from mentorship, because often mentors are people that are there to support you, but sponsors not only support you, but they're actively looking to promote you, whether you're in the room or not, right? So if you're not in the room and your sponsor's there and they hear of an opportunity, they should be talking about you and saying, hey, I think Rana would be great for this role. Right? And just because she's not in the room doesn't mean your sponsor doesn't talk about you, and think about how do they help promote you up within the organization. And that's the difference between a mentor and a sponsor, is really a sponsor, feeling like they are really invested in you succeeding and climbing within the organization. And so I think it's important for people to think about, and particularly those in leadership, how can they be sponsors for people, and particularly those that may have marginalized identities in their organizations? How can they make sure that they're sponsoring them? How do they make sure that across the organization that people are being evaluated in an equitable way, and that there aren't sometimes advantages given to some groups versus others, because there's not really anything in writing on how we're going to evaluate people for promotions and other opportunities.
People often talk about mentoring and mentorship, but I hadn't heard it described, like the difference between sponsorship and mentorship described in this way. And it was very clear, and I love it. Beth, if you don't mind, I'm going to take it and run with it, and
please
make sure that we incorporate that into our organization.
I would love to hear your thoughts on, how does leadership on this issue of diversity and diversity in STEM look like to you?
I would hope that, at some point, it doesn't matter if you're a female founder. It doesn't matter if you're a person of color starting a company or taking a company public. I would love to see a version of the universe where there's lots of examples of people who are successful in technology and have access to both economic and financial opportunities because they are part of this incredible ecosystem that is science and technology. But this also brings me back to what Science Club for Girls does. You have created an opportunity for girls to continue to engage, to continue to be creative, to continue to problem solve, and I think at the end of the day, be empowered, right? And if there's one message I want to give to any of the girls listening in today is, irrespective of your age, I think it's important that you each feel empowered and feel that you have a voice and you have something to add to the table, and don't shy away from that.
What we try to do at YW Boston, what I try to do is to meet people where they are around this issue. And it's not about trying to convince people that this is the right thing to do, but understand where they are and try to support people to understand why it is important and the value that it can bring not only to their organizations, but also to their own lives. I think that we are often held back as individuals when we don't understand the biases that we have. And so being able to do my own work, being able to help people do their own work, to understand what might be getting in their way is part of what I see my work and the work of YW Boston. Again, is helping people understand why this matters, but not convincing them, understanding where they are in this journey, what's getting in their way, and helping ideally to move them along. Because again, I believe that we as a society are only going to benefit if we are able to, have everybody really be at their full potential. And we're not going to be able to do that if we can't create environments where people can do that. And so I think, part of our work is making sure those environments exist. So when girls who are part of Science Club for Girls are able to enter their workforce, they're really able to thrive because the environments are ready for